racial and socioeconomic diversity within our community. I think just open it up for comments or what you like about this, what you don't like.
What if we went through all of them and then took them apart, so then we would know?
Okay, perfect. I'm good with that. Second one that was shared last board meeting, efficiency with excellence. And the definition is we commit to efficiently utilizing our facilities with the focus on ensuring rigorous academic opportunities for students. School capacity will support optimal learning while also providing advanced educational programming in all buildings. Intentional planning. Facilities planning will be data-driven, taking into consideration factors such as current facility condition, deferred maintenance, and community growth. Planning will align with the needs presented through data while considering the nuances of our community. Our facilities plan will support the goals outlined in Future Ready 2023. Courageous decision-making. We recognize that difficult decisions will need to be made for our district to address the facilities issue. In our decisions, the district as a whole will take priority over individual preferences throughout the planning process. Defined, transparent process. Hamilton County Schools commits to a defined and transparent process during facility planning and discussions. The process will be clearly communicated internally and with all of our community. We will execute a plan for facilities with discipline and consistency. Innovative approaches. We will embrace innovative approaches and welcome expertise from other industries and educational facility experts. Our approach will be deliberate in seeking facilities that support innovation in educational programming and physical buildings. So those are the 6. And again, when you think about operating principles, probably somewhere between 4 and 6 is about where we want to be. So we could take these and consolidate some. We could take something completely out, add to. Again, this is something the board really needs to be comfortable with and commit to.
We can open it up for discussion. Just use your red cup and I will get you on the list and call you. Ms. Thurman.
Yeah, I guess the first one's where I want to start. I guess I'm just not real sure of reduce the number of schools in Hamilton County. Are we, are these some of the schools we've already talked about consolidating, or are we talking about closing even more schools? Or are we talking about looking back at the MGT report? Exactly what, to reduce the number of schools in Hamilton County, exactly what are we looking at to do that?
So I think when you look back at MGT and when you look at even the budget working group, both of them talked about the need to reduce the number of schools. What that number is, I think, is a discussion for the board. You know, whether it's getting down to, 65, whether it's a number that's more comfortable for the board and for the community. But I think similar to what we've done with Harrison Elementary, that project consolidated some schools. It addressed a lot of deferred maintenance and will help us put operational money back into teaching and learning. So in my mind, that's kind of what it's talking about.
Okay. It says that reflect the racial and socioeconomic diversity within our schools. When you're talking about, and it's under rezoning there, are you talking about rezoning some of the schools to make that happen, or what exactly are you looking at doing?
So in my mind, when I was thinking about this one, I was thinking about the rezoning conversations that we had right before we were hit with this pandemic. If you remember that time, we were talking about some of our downtown schools, and really even came into the conversation with Hillcrest of, do we take Hillcrest and do we put half in Hardy, or do we take Hillcrest and put it in Harrison? And to me, if this operating principle were there, that would have helped that conversation move forward to where we said, you know what, it really, not only from a capacity standpoint, but really for the diversity within the school, makes more sense for all of Hillcrest to go to Harrison.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Prez.
So I had a similar question to Mrs. Thurman there. Because of the reduction, that first statement, you just gave reasons. I actually think posing it in the positive of our goal is to create some efficiencies here or things like that. But to me, just the statement of we're going to reduce schools, I think leaves a huge question of what, why, what, which schools, you know, so.
Say that, how did you say, our goal is to produce efficiency?
Yeah, and I mean, if we can produce efficiency without reducing schools, then, you know, that might be a good place to start in our priorities, because it'll take a while to reduce and consolidate schools. And I think we need to start with what we're trying to aim at, right? And then the second part of that, or it's actually the first part, when I hear it'll be transparent and clearly communicated internally and with the community, I hear we're gonna make a decision transparently and then we'll let everybody know, versus we're actually gonna make a decision based on really taking the input of the community, especially consolidating and reducing a school has a massive impact on a community. And of course, I'm talking about a community in my own that has 2 schools being considered for that. And so I want to make sure that we understand very clearly what the impact is to those families in that area before we just go ahead and make a decision and communicate it clearly to them, right? So when I hear the language, I hear it as, here we're going to decide, we'll communicate it clearly, versus it's going to be a decision that really takes into account listening to the community and bringing them into the decision-making process, so.
So I have a question.
Ms. Jones.
So I kind of have a question about, I mean, I agree with what Marco is saying, and having been in this process now with Hillcrest to Harrison, the discussion with Tyner, even to Tyner into Tyner, that was a whole odd conversation, building into building, but Tyner into Tyner, and then this Lakeside conversation. I think, while I do agree with what Marco is saying, I think we probably do need to find the verbiage for that, and I think that's, I believe we have to, that's gonna be a tough, not a tough task, I don't wanna say that, a tough undertaking, because at the end of the day, we are listening to them and we want to do what they want, but if they want us to keep 10 buildings that we know is not efficient and economically sound for Hamilton County, then we've not done what we said we were gonna do. So I guess the verbiage is, we have to figure out how to say that. And of course, we do listen to them and we do want to do what they want to do. But I can tell you from personal experience, like, I'm gonna use the 2 Tyners. So they wanted to keep Tyner Academy the way it is. And we know, all of us have seen Tyner Academy, right? And I just couldn't, for the sake of me, wrap my mind around why you wouldn't want renovations or additions or even a new building. They wanted that old building that wasn't safe, that wasn't safe for them. I mean, they wanted that. And so, in good conscience, how do I leave them in that building? And how do I come back and ask the 8 of you all to leave them in that building when all of you all probably agree with me, but we know what they want? And so that was a struggle. And Dr. Johnson could say that was a struggle to convince them, I don't want to say convince them, but get them to understand that they deserved additions and renovations because of the institutionalization, I think, in some areas to buildings. Not even a subconscious, I should say, institutionalizations to buildings. And so I think we have to figure out how to say that and know that, and let them know that they are included and we do value and we want to work with them and make sure that the community is supported in what they need. But we also have to make sure that we're giving them the equitable situation that they deserve. So an old building with asbestos windows is not equitable even though they love that building. That's not fair when across town it's brand new windows and they're not worried about breathing mold and asbestos. You get what I'm saying? So how do we figure that? Because, and I just say that because the climate of our society now is that, of course, they're our bosses. We know that they elected us, we work for them, but it's kind of like, do what we say. And then it was like, but do we leave you in that? It's kind of like, do you leave a person homeless when you know they need a home? You know what I'm saying? So how do you?
And that's all I'm saying is the verbiage to me communicates that we're going to decide transparently and then communicate versus we're bringing a community along in the process of understanding of the next step. And yeah, it's difficult. It's there's gonna have to be courageous decision-making, and at some point, a decision will have to be made, but our role is to serve the community that's appointed us as well. And more, I think of this, reducing the number of schools in itself as a goal. I'd never state that as a goal, no matter what. It's what you said. The goal isn't to reduce the number of schools. The goal is to create higher efficiencies, to bring more resources together, because it impacts. Maybe there's ways we could do that, and financially we may have to in the meantime, before we go ahead and reduce. I don't want to put that goal aside if there's a way we can achieve that while reducing, while improving our schools, so.
Dr. Highlander?
Thank you. I really agree with a lot of what both of you have said. I think we need, I'll just pull this on for a second to talk. I think we need, Mr. President, I agree with you, I think we need to have, and I believe this board has taken input from communities. And we will want to talk with them and speak with them and get their input. I mean, we were elected to make the decisions, but I think we want our communities to give us input. I know I do, and I think every one of the 9 of us do. One thing I'm a little concerned about is I realize this is a long-term goal, and there's some good things here. But one thing is the long-term financial impact of the pandemic that we're in is really, could be a strain. I know right now, we're struggling to get people to clean. I know a couple of my schools had someone start cleaning, now they don't have people to clean. And, to wipe them and, wipe the things down and keep them. And we're having to spend a whole lot of expenditures, and there are businesses out there that may never recover from this, small businesses. And I'm just concerned that we proceed with caution. I'm not saying don't, I'm saying proceed with caution and be fiscally responsible with our limited finances in the future. But I agree with both of you. I think you're both saying the same thing. We need input from our community, and I think we need to let our decisions be strongly influenced by the community input. Thank you. And by the way, the coupon books are a gift from the Fund for Excellence, and if anyone did not get one, see one. I'm on the board. I'd be glad to get you one if you did not get one. It's a gift from the Fund for Excellence for each of you.
Thank you. Mr. Smith?
I agree with the two of y'all too, but I think you kind of address that a little later on. I know we're not down there yet, we're still number 1, but when we're saying, in our decisions, the district as a whole will take priority over individual preferences throughout the process. So, when you're bringing in the community, and we've done that, I think, a lot. I know we did in the process with MGT. I mean, there was a lot of community meetings, and of course, one of the things that came out of that, we got too many schools. But Carissa's absolutely right. I mean, these communities that's going to be hard for them to let the district as a whole be the priority instead of what they want to see in their very district. So you're absolutely right. That's where the pushback's going to be. But the way I read this, Marco, it says, I think, if I'm reading this right, it says we aim to reduce the number of schools in Hamilton County. So the way I would interpret that is our goal, to reduce the number of schools. And it goes on to say to reflect the racial and social economic diversity within our community. And I'm assuming that we'll do that with zoning rather than trying to bus people around. That always scares me. I think Carissa's absolutely right. I mean, you're going to get pushback from the community if it gets used to whatever it is they're in.
Ms. Hill?
So, with regard to the question of, do we include language about an intentionality of closing buildings, I think it's important to note that this is these are operating principles specifically for Blueprint 2030. And Blueprint 2030 is coming out of the work that this board commissioned by MGT, the knowledge from the Mayor's Budget Working Group. So there's an acknowledgement that we have more schools than we need. I think, Marco, your point about, is that the ultimate goal? No, it's not. It's efficiency and it's excellence. And so I say point taken with regard to how we prioritize these. Like, I don't know that these appear in any particular order, so to speak. And so, Justin, as we fine tune the language within them, we might also be wise to think about the order in which they appear, because they can build on one another and come out with different meaning based on the order in which they are presented, or people can infer meaning based on that order. So, even to note that efficiency with excellence is perhaps our highest goal might be something that we'd want to consider. When I saw this draft, you guys, and I saw courageous decision-making, it made my heart go pitter-patter, and it made me think I would love our entire county to make decisions in this way, to be clear about how we are going to think through this process, and put the county and the entire school system first within this process. If we agree that this is in fact what we want to do, I think is a standard-setting decision. Steve mentioned limited finances, and I'm not seeing in here anywhere where we actually do talk about cost being a consideration within our operating principles. And so perhaps that's something that we should work in alongside some more intentional mention of community input with regard to the operating principles themselves. Because yes, we have gotten community input and we do, but when we codify this as operating principles for Blueprint 2030, this is the thing we'll go back to time and again, and boards, hopefully 6 years, 8 years from now, will go back to time and again as they're making decisions. So to work community input in, and then something about spending dollars wisely. Perhaps Justin might work into innovative approaches. Because we want to be deliberate in seeking facilities that support innovation in educational programming and physical buildings, at the least cost to taxpayers, or at the best value for taxpayers, or something like that might be appropriate.
So I will echo that efficiency with excellence, I think, would be a great number one, because it starts with what our objective truly is there, which is to create this. I would personally put reduced schools at the end, but
And Marco, it went through my head like perhaps we don't even need that sentence, but when I think about these operating principles being something that is going to last a long time, we need to remember that this was part of the why of all of this. And I think it makes sense to have that in there somewhere.
see, but that's interesting you say that, because when I saw that, I actually thought the same thing. I thought, if this is a lasting principle, at what point do you say that principle no longer applies, right? We're saying we reduce schools. That's true maybe today, but it might not be true 5 years from now. That makes sense. We want to create lasting values through which we guide the decision-making, maybe now, but maybe also 10 years from now, right? So that to me is not a lasting value. That's a value, and it's also not a defined value. And I'll stop on that, but that's why I say, even to say, I was trying to think, to even say to right size or right, to me is a little better than we're just out there to reduce the number of schools. Yeah.
But
And I
within-
think the language, so my perspective as a citizen and a taxpayer of Hamilton County, not in my position, is that, you know, I've been back in Hamilton County 12 years. And since I came back, we've talked about having too many schools, but we very rarely do anything about it. When I was in Shelby County prior to here, Shelby County had 10,000 more kids and like 23 less schools. And I know the geography of Shelby County is very different, so you take that in consideration. I don't think that 51 schools is the right number, but I certainly think less than 78 is probably where we need. And so in some ways, I was poking to try to get this conversation started, because again, the reality of what an operating principle is meant to do is, if we're not in a good place, it's to prod us to action. By saying we need to reduce the number of schools, it's in some ways trying to prod us to action. I do think the maybe moving efficiency up and making it clear, really the goal is to produce efficiency while reducing school is maybe a method to get at that efficiency.
And you said it right there. To me, it's not a principle, it's a method through which we may be able to achieve that.
I think the only thing I'd add to anything that's been shared is, and you all know this, like, it's just the truth. The more schools we have, the more strained our operational dollars are, and, you know, it impacts our programming. So, you know, whether it's related arts or whether it's, you know, another area, we end up with half-time this over here and part-time that over there, versus being able to have, you know, full staff, because you've got the numbers to justify it. Same with librarians and counselors and all those things that, from an operational standpoint, there's usually restrictions on and limitations on. So that's really the impetus for the conversation, in addition to the operational dollars from the standpoint of just operating the plant, you know, because there are true operational dollars from the standpoint of operating the plant as well, you know, HVAC, lighting, et cetera.
I only want to add, I'm operating as Justin's secretary a little bit. I just shared a document so that you all can see real-time changes in response, if you want to look at that and confirm or deny, just to help us with the efficiency of this process. So I just shared that out as a Google Doc.
And in addition, I mean, we all know that we're paid, our money's coming through BDP. And correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Parker, but I mean, like high school's 35 to 1, roughly, is that right? And younger grades 30 to 1, 25 to 1, and so forth. And if we have a small school, it's really hard to get that maximum number in every classroom. And so we're operating much less efficiently people-wise. And I understand that. We have to balance that with community needs and long-term bus rides and things like that. So there's certainly, like Dr. Towns alluded to, that the efficiency, and Dr. Johnson said straight out, the efficiency is much easier in big school. We all understand that. We've got to balance the needs, and that's definitely one of them.
Yeah, I'll share kind of where I land on this one in particular, kind of with Caritza on it. I think I go back to, and this isn't so much of closing down or reducing the number of schools, but I think if we look at what we just did with Harrison and then Lakeside, and then what we did with CSLA, you know, I had parents saying, I'd rather stay in this 80-year-old building than go into a building that's, you know, I think some of it is complacency, and like this district, we haven't done a good job of showing our students and our parents and our community members what we should be as a district in our buildings. When I walk through a building like East Ridge Elementary or East Brainerd Elementary, and then I walk through a school like Barger, I mean, the disparities we have in our school system are very shocking. And so I think, you know, any of us up here sit up here and say, you know, we have too many schools, and that's just been over the years of poor planning and whatnot. So I think in some way, to me, it is a principle that we have to reduce that. Me and Ms. Thurman, budget time, we say we need more maintenance money, more maintenance money. But if we lower that square footage, we're getting more dollars per square foot. In the long goal, that's helping us with deferred maintenance as well. And so I think it's kind of, it's a domino effect in efficiency, in finances, and in operations and how we operate. If we can get, what will be our school count into January with Harrison coming online and schools going online?
Ask me hard questions.
76.
76?
76. Yeah, so, I think it can be done. I think like Dr. Robertson said, his time out in Memphis, Rutherford County, I think, has roughly the same amount of students we have, but they have like 40-something schools. Not saying that's near the number, but if 67 schools, 68 schools is our number, somewhere around there, and I think that gets phased out as we do our phases in phase 1, phase 2, and whatnot. But we really have to go down to that courageous decision-making and saying, this is not your CSLA building of 80 years old that you've grown up in, but this is a brand-new state-of-the-art building that's going to have everything you need. And I think that's something this district and this community really hasn't seen. I think we're starting to see it with this Harrison and CSLA that it can be done. So that's where I sit on that, and I think, the verbiage can be tweaked and whatnot, but I do think, in my opinion, it is important to keep at least somewhere in these principles in the back of our mind. We have to look at that number of 76 schools and go from there, and how do we make that efficient?
But one thing we have to remember, that my brother lives in Rutherford County, so I know a little bit about that up there. One thing we have is the river dividing us in half. That makes a huge difference, because if it was all flat land, we could reconfigure the schools and be a whole lot more
Yeah, but
efficient.
that does cause, that
and
does
the
cause
mountains,
it.
yeah, and the
Square
mountains.
miles.
Yeah, I agree.
Square mileage of.
Yeah, that's why,
Yeah.
the distances
Yeah.
between schools. are-
Yeah, we have challenges, and I think
Yeah.
geography is
So we
probably.
need to consider,
Absolutely.
consider that, because
Well, yeah,
it's
yeah,
a whole
yeah.
different situation. But also, I was gonna ask about Dawn School. Now, Dawn School's moving in Hillcrest, so there's another school we're getting rid of, so we still have
Long-term
that,
plan.
that amount.
That's
Check,
long-term plan. Well, not counting that, we didn't pull, I don't think, Don or,
Washington
I'm gonna say
Alternative.
Wallace.
Because we're getting rid of the adult high school, moving it to Harrison, Hillcrest, we were already counting Hillcrest, and we've done the same thing with Dawn, so we got rid of 2 schools there.
Yeah.
Got rid of, the Lakeside, well, we'll be getting rid of Lakeside, but CSLA's taking that.
But
So-
dropping the old CSLA, and
Yeah.
so it'll
Well,
it'll be
we've gotten
around
rid of-
75.
Well, there's big efficiency dollars, I
Or
think,
shut
to your
down, I
point.
should say.
Some of those schools have large deferred maintenance
Yeah.
accounts that we're able to take off the books,
Yeah,
so
that's,
to speak.
that's 3 schools right
Yeah.
there that we've taken.
Yeah. And I think, but, when I think long-term about this conversation, kind of similar to Justin, when I was in Clarksville, Montgomery, they've got 37,000 kids now, and, they've got 38 schools. We have 38 school buildings. But there's a difference, so there's a complexity to Hamilton County, right? Because, y'all know this history better than me, but, you had a merger and the way the facility, you got a lot of nuances and intricacies there that create a level of complexity. But I do think, when I think about a goal from our seat, our conversations are always, is there an opportunity when we build a new school or whatever, is there an opportunity to pull some old schools offline and get students in better learning environments? So how do we think really intentionally as we go forward about any new buildings that we're able to build? Are we able to capture a couple of schools that may be in really, really bad shape and get students in great learning environments? Because it does impact, the way students, teachers, where everybody feels coming into a school building. And so that's really, our thought, I think, going forward. And unfortunately, the only other thing I'll say about this conversation, it appears, and again, you all know this historically better than I, but, a lot of times the growth that's happened, particularly in District 7 and 9, that we've chased that growth. And so every time we get any kind of money, we're having to build a brand new East Hamilton, or we're having to build, whatever, in another area. And so, having that opportunity to really come back and address the deferred maintenance needs that exist, are significant. But, you know, we gotta have a starting point.
Ms. Hill?
This conversation to me reinforces the why Justin would have that phrase, reduce the number of schools, in these operating principles, because we've had this same conversation no fewer than 8 times probably over the course of the last year. And so if we can get to a place as a board of saying, we agree, we need fewer schools, let's write it down, it's for Blueprint 2030. When Blueprint 2030 is done, then we can take it out. But if we write it down, we've agreed that that's what we all know to be true.
Any other comments on any of these? I know we spent a lot of time on that first one, but any of the other principles? Feedback for Justin?
So I've got a question that Dr. Highlander alluded to, but obviously we all hope that a year from now or 2 years from now, we're all back to normal in schools. You know, that would be our prayer. But has there been anything with regards to future facility planning that we've learned through this unprecedented, to use the word, situation that would perhaps lead us to think differently about facilities in any way? And I'll give an example that's not even COVID related, but for instance, when a tornado hit a 1,500 student school, we, you know, thank goodness we had a space, but we realized how difficult it would be to find accommodations for 1,500 students all of a sudden, right? That, you know, it's not that I'm against bigger schools, but there are realities as well to bigger schools where, you know, shutting down a 300 student school is not the same as shutting down a 1,500 student school. So has there been anything we've learned in this process that we would say, you know what, as we move forward with facilities, this is a principle we've got to keep in mind?
And Justin may speak to this a little bit more. I think you raise a really good question. I think we're in an interesting place because we're in the first 6 months of COVID and the first 3 months of school in the midst of COVID. So I believe that 4, 5, 6 months from now, there'll be some really clear maybe lessons learned. I think right now it's hard to really decipher between because, you know, we give parents choice around whether or not they want to have students at school on campus or off campus. And it's hard to really decipher what the long-term implications of that are until things settle down, until you have a vaccine, until, you know, some of those other things really get into the works. I do think long-term there's going to be some opportunity for consideration because I do think what's happening, whether it be our, you know, our virtual school, whether it be, you know, so I think the online learning story goes both ways. I think there are students that have had challenges, right, with that, and parents that have, we know as well, parents that make that choice. I think there are also a segment of students and parents and families that have really experienced immense success. And so, you know, I think it's going to open up a whole different way in which we think about it, but to know exactly what the implications are on our facilities planning, we're probably some months out before we can really say with, you know, from a definitive nature that this absolutely is the approach we need to take based on what we've seen. We need to kind of see how it plays out over the next few months.
And would that be answered in the intentional planning operating principle? Like,
Absolutely.
and that's, you know, I
Yeah.
would hate for us to learn late after an investment that maybe we should have planned for technology to be a certain way inside a school.
Absolutely. So I think one of the two pieces. One, yes, your technology and all the you know, so there's an element of planning from the standpoint of what we need from a resource standpoint to make school come alive for students, whether that be on-campus learning or virtually. There are some lessons learned if we sustain in the virtual space or the family sustain in the virtual spaces that would force us to think differently about a new school, you know, and how we might build that or how we might provide technology access for teachers that have an on-campus group and an online group or vice versa. So yes to that, but then also from the standpoint of facilities planning, just, speaking of the nuts and bolts of it, we always monitor capacity rates. And so we'll, in particular as COVID, settles, we'll have a really clear understanding what we look like from a capacity standpoint, and we'll bring to the board and work with the board on considerations, recommendations around, rezoning, et cetera, because over a period of X amount of time, we've seen a reduction in, the amount of students that are at school X. And as good stewards, before we build, unless the geography, I think as Ron mentioned earlier, it keeps us from doing that. If we can rezone, y'all know as we dealt with the downtown rezoning, we were like going around, it was almost a sea, we were pulling kids, we were looking at pulling kids, around the block. So we'll look at all those efficiencies and try to find them. So yes to the innovation piece and the technology, et cetera, but then also yes to just the nuts and bolts of what's capacity here, what's current enrollment, and how do we best, make sure we maximize our resources.
How will our demographic shift over the next 6 months? We don't.
Mr. President, I think, I was thinking around the same thing, and I think the innovative approaches, it falls under that too, and how we approach physical buildings and our educational programming and stuff, going forward. I'm not sure if a school will look like it is now, ever again when it comes to technology and stuff like that. Ms. Thurman, did you?
Oh, no.
Okay. Silk.
I did want to elevate the defined, transparent process operating principle. This one to me is very, very important. All of these together could have prevented some of the consternation and confusion that came about with the decision related to CSLA and the 20-year experience that they had. But in particular, I think for our community and our commission and our school board, for everyone to know what the process is that we will go through each and every time we are seeking out a new facility and we are potentially closing a facility or relocating a school community. You all have done excellent work making some very complex things transparent. For example, the COVID reopening and just how much information is out there. And as yet, we don't have that very specific way that we approach buildings every time. And I think, part of that's because of funding, because you do it a little different every time because it doesn't happen on a regular basis. But to carefully execute this idea of a defined, transparent process, I think is very important and could help our community feel much more comfortable with something that is inherently difficult.
Chairman Wingate.
I know I got in here late, so if this has already been covered, please stop me. But the efficiency with excellence, and you did ask Tucker if we had a question about any of the rest of these. Is that right? Could I go ahead and ask that now? Talking about efficiency of the facilities and also kind of the standards for new construction and renovation. I know we've had this conversation before, and I don't remember where we landed on this or if we did land at all. And I do understand the nuances or some of them that go into it, but kind of where are we from your guys' standpoint of going, hey, here's an elementary school plan, a building that meets the academic concerns and needs that we have, and I know, again, like I said, I know the nuances of some of that's out of our control as that building process gets to county government, and they ultimately are responsible for building facilities, and then they choose, who will build or not build or design. But you know, it has been done in the past in this county, and I'm not saying it was done well. I mean, you know, there are folks that love those pod schools and those that hate them, and they're not good for being able to see and observe and supervise. But you know where I'm going with that, Justin. Like, you know, the high school, the middle school plan, the elementary school plan, like, and again, and I know the kickback that a lot of times that the construction folks will have, well, that plan doesn't work on this site, you know, or we're not going to be, and I know all of that, but I do know that it's happened before, and I do know that we've all expressed desire, and I know you all have expressed a desire to do that. So kind of, has anything changed on that front, or is it more, anyway, I'll let you answer.
So we've talked about that moving forward. Obviously, right now with any new monies that would come through, I think that we've got to look from our design to completion process and make sure that it really makes sense and make sure that we're being efficient with those dollars. I 100% hear what you're saying in terms of, you know, design. I mean, can we put together a stock design for an elementary, middle, and a high school? I think there's probably somewhere in between what we're doing and what we can do. I will say that if we go back to the pods, I think you'll have a revolt in school leadership.
No, never.
But
And
all of those schools were built, what, 70s? Is that right?
They were, and there were federal grants that,
Okay.
the reason that they were built that way is there was federal money that subsidized the building of them. And so districts were jumping on the opportunity to build those buildings. But as a former principal in one of those buildings, please don't do that again. But
If we get some federal money now,
The federal government pays 2/3 of the building.
that's,
The federal government pays 2/3, I'm voting for it.
touche.
No, because you ate it up in utilities costs. 'Cause it's so
But I
there.
do hear what you're saying, and I think that there may be ways that if we, next time, if we get a big sum of money, do we go to some experts and say, here's our problem, talk us through it, how do we use this most effectively? Because what we've done in the past is say, okay, here's X number for this school, X number for this school, let's go to 2 different architects, 2 different builders. So yes, Dr. Johnson has pressed us to start that.
and I will say to the credit, that there are several buildings where the plan has been reused. And so, for instance, you know, Harrison, and Uwa, you know, are essentially the new Harrison and the old Uwa, and several of, you know, we have multiple sites where the same plan is being used. I think the question around efficiency is there a different approach? And so we absolutely are looking at the different approaches. I think the only other caveat that, you know, probably an elementary, a middle, a high, but then also a middle high, because there are pockets and situations where that's an appropriate consideration for a community. So yeah, those are all conversations. that
Are
we're having.
Hickson Middle and Red Bank Middle the same plan, or pretty close?
Pretty close.
Pretty close, yeah. Yeah.
Ms. Thurman?
Yes, I just wanted to say that, I know we talked about doing this before and found out we had to pay the architect every time we use the plans. You have to pay them again. I guess maybe kind of tweak it a little bit or something, but they do have to be paid every time you use their plan. Also, I know that most of our elementary schools now, and I know it came in real handy with Harrison when we decided we had to add another wing. A lot of our elementary schools are made to where you can add a wing on, you know, pretty easily, and I think that's something that, like you said, Joe, that makes it a whole lot more efficient. But I know up in Saudi Daisy, a lot of our schools, if you notice, the elementary schools are all built pretty much alike because Don Mott drew the plans, and he just drew a school. Some architects want to build Taj Mahals to themselves, and they put all this expensive marble and all this stuff that's so unnecessary. But anyway, I think that's another thing that we get ready to do, a school building. We just need a school. It's gonna last. We don't need, you know, all the
And-
building with it. Sometimes we get.
Yeah, and I think there's some perceptions out there of the way we do things and that it's more expensive. But, you know, I'll give an example of, like Spring Creek. It's that block, open face block, and, you know, people say, well, that's so much cheaper. Why? every one of those buildings that we have that's with that open face block, we've replaced the roof every 7 to 10 years, and it ends up not being more efficient. But like an example of what we're talking about on that idea of not building a Taj Mahal, and East Brainerd Elementary was built like this, is the walls in between the classrooms, you can build those out of sheetrock, like a more hard sheetrock than what you have in your house, but it's much cheaper than putting in, block and everything else. And when you go through that building, the main structures of it are block, which is why it held up surprisingly well in that tornado. But we can put sheetrock in places. We can use some metals instead of wood in certain places, and those conversations are ongoing. I think the question that I have is just from the beginning of the process to the end, are we doing it the most efficient and the best way we can? And I guess a lesson, that we learned is to ask that question, and, to look at the tornado, to look at, the pandemic, and make sure that we're building schools that are safe, that are great learning environments for kids, but it's also an efficient use of the funds.
Well, may I say that anyone that puts a flat roof on another school needs to be shot at sundown. Just saying. Every time we put a flat roof on a school, it leaks in a year. Just saying. Common sense would dictate everything. Evidently not.
Anything else on these before we move on? Dr. Robinson?
So what we'll do is take these back, and Nikki has shared that document, so we'll take the notes and make some revisions, and then the next time we meet, Tucker and I were talking about this earlier. I don't know, Mr. Bennett, if there's a soft vote of approval, but I do think at some point, some way, the board needs to have some acknowledgement that these are the operating principles that you've committed to. Can we just do a raise of the hands or something?
Yeah, I think asking the board's endorsement of how you want to operate your division in County Schools is appropriate.
Okay. Good conversation. So next step, and don't necessarily want to jump into this specifically tonight, but I do need, or I will request that you send Tucker and I. We talked about this briefly last time, but it's very important that we have, common language and a common definition for terms. And I threw up a couple just as examples, but, that when we say community schools, do we all know what we're talking about and speaking the same language? When we mention capacity, do we all, agree that, what we're aiming for is somewhere between 85 and 90%, or is it 80 and 90%? But what do we mean when we say that school is above capacity or that school is under capacity? And so having a common definition for those terms, and what I would ask of the board is if there are some of those terms that you feel like we need a definition for, if you could email Tucker and myself, and maybe even give some input on what you think the definition should be. And then we can take those and kind of put a glossary together that kind of could back up with this, with the operating principles, so that, again, within the board, you're speaking the same language, but also when we have community meetings, we could share those definitions so everybody understands what we're talking about.
Dr. Hollander?
So we need to, you say email those to Tucker?
Tucker and myself, if you do that, we'll, and again, add some input if you've got, what you think it should mean.
Oh, no, I don't. I just wanted to make sure, like, when we talk about these larger schools, like going from like a Hillcrest to a Harrison, and, a lot of conversation was like, well, why do we need these large or super schools or whatever? So whatever term or appropriate title of that size school is, I think we need to define what that number looks like. So if that school is to hold 1,500 children like East Brainerd did or whatever, I think we need to make sure that the families, the community understands that those schools will hold up to this amount of children. Well, can hold, I should say. The school is able to hold up to this amount of children versus a Woodmore or a Rivermont that may be able to just hold this amount of children. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah, so I
they
think what you're saying
understand
is-
what the difference is
Right.
when we talk about those schools and the capacity.
And one thing that we found in community conversations is people associated larger schools with larger class sizes, which is
Right,
not true.
and
And
not-
so
right.
we
So I think we
could
need to-
clarify that.
Yeah, clarify that if we can give the class
Yep.
ratio or whatever that looks like, so they understand that it's not necessarily 100 kids in the kindergarten class.
Yes, ma'am.
Dr. Highlander.
It might be helpful, Dr. Arbison, if we looked at the most efficient size schools. And, I mean, some too big, too small, I mean, just, this is ideal. Obviously, we can't always do that. But if you could look at what is the most efficient size, that, you know, in your spare time.
No, I think
It's
both
basically
points
what-
well taken. Yep.
Basically backing up what you said.
Yes, sir.
Um,
So-
To Steve's point, two of the phrases I'm going to be sending to you come from the efficiency with excellence definition. Rigorous academic opportunities and advanced educational programming. As we think about how we back into what is an ideal school size, I wonder if we might start with what are the things that create advanced, what are the things that are necessary for advanced educational programming, and what are rigorous academic opportunities? So in an elementary school in District 6, what can a family expect if they're going to find that they're moved from one building to another? What is the rigorous academic opportunity that then comes with the move to a school community that is in fact larger? I think that would be very useful.
So I'm gonna ask a question and just kind of, and maybe you can say, let's follow up on that later. But in the midst of this and in the midst of open enrollment and you know, choice in schools, which probably is a good definition too. But as we look at that, are we still looking at keeping those principles as well, or are we saying, well, by now, because we made these larger schools, that won't be quite the same focus?
Let me re-ask your question, make sure I'm clear. Are you you're asking about our choice programs, whether it be magnet,
Yeah, yeah.
et cetera? Will we be keeping
But with
those?
with open enrollment as well, so are
Yeah,
we
so it's
saying
a-
like, because open enrollment has to do with capacity?
Yeah.
Basically, this school would remove, other than magnet, because if we went toward a larger school, we potentially, I'm asking, I don't know, we'd be removing, you know, those choices other than magnet schools in the process. Because the idea is that these schools are being built to contain the capacity of this
Right.
area.
Right. Yeah, I think, I want to make sure I'm following where you're.
Maybe I'm not, yeah.
Well, so when we build if we build a larger school, right, you know, and let's just use Harrison as the example. Harrison's kind of unique because I think as Rhonda mentioned earlier, like that's a school, when that's a situation where it's the right approach to building a school. The core is large. And so I'll give Appleton as a prime example. Appleton is the example of a building that does not have a core that is large enough to support another wing. And so when I think about core, you're thinking about library, gym, cafeteria. The cores aren't big enough to support another 300 students in that building. Whereas Harrison, you can flip the switch on it, and the core is large enough to support it. So if we build a 1,000 student, 1,100 student elementary school, or 1,400-1,500 student middle high, you would be looking at what schools, making sure the schools fit, so to speak, and that the enrollment for the schools that you're building it for support, right, can be supported by that new school. There wouldn't have any adverse impact, so to speak, on any of the choice programming, whether it be a magnet school, whether it be, in fact, I'll give, for instance, with CSLA, for instance, it's going to open up more seats for opportunities not just at CSLA, but also for the secondary level at CSAS. And so, you know, there's not the goal wouldn't be to have an adverse impact, so to speak, on those students. And on the back end of that, and this may be where the answer to the question is, we would be looking at the zone lines concurrently. And so, you know, we, just like with Harrison, we looked at the zone lines to see what schools made sense to be a part of that school.
I'd only add this, I think that part of, what you're getting at, Mr. Perez, is that open enrollment schools are under-enrolled, right? They are places where utilization versus capacity is low.
And by doing that, they offer opportunity for people who are
That-
looking at.
Correct, and at this point, you know, open enrollment is provide your own transportation, which of course Magnet and Future Ready Institutes, we do have opportunities for transportation, and we were actually just having that conversation if there's any way to piggyback even the open enrollment opportunity. So to the extent that we create greater efficiency around right sizing, I like that term, the number of schools in our district, and creating a rational zoning process, we might not have as many under-enrolled schools for there to be space for open enrollment. But right now, I mean, honestly, we're trying to use the letting people vote with their feet to solve some of our inefficiency issues with open enrollment.
And I'll just say that I give a lot of credit to the board, because, you know, you all challenged us to do things like look at staffing models and, you know, some of those structures, putting them in place. And so as a result of having staffing models and things like that in place, principals understand, you know, Jill and her team really look at this, like, they understand, okay, these are my numbers for sixth grade. And it looks like, you know, I'm gonna be down or up or whatever the number is, 42 students. So let me reach out, I can offer 42 open enrollment slots, right? And so that's kind of how some of that back end, we look at that staffing model, principals understand how they're going to be staffed based on their numbers. And by all means, if you want to give 42 students an opportunity, we're going to have to figure out how to do that.
Anything else on that? You will just send those to me and Justin, and we can, at our next facility meeting, we can get those out to you when we get the updated operating principles.
So last thing I have for this evening is consideration of a property that's by Lakeside Elementary. I believe that Dr. Johnson may have mentioned this in a board update or given you guys some heads up about it. There is a property that's for sale that's adjoining Lakeside Elementary. It's kind of an aerial view of it. That's the address. There's a listing price of $1.2 million, and it's about 14.5 acres. Just to give you an idea of where it actually sits, I pulled the GIS, so the one on your left is the existing Lakeside Elementary property, and you can see the outline of it. It actually goes into the what's listed as the Lakeside Park, and then the image on your right shows the 14.5 acres that is just to the, I guess it would be the south of that existing Lakeside property. We've had some communication with the realtor, and he knows that this potentially could be of interest, but for us to move forward, obviously, we need to have some consideration from the board and you know, determine whether or not there's interest in this property.
Dr. Highlander?
Question, the property, I'm assuming by the right, it's on the opposite side of the road from Lakeside, is that correct?
It's on the same side, so if you go down Jersey Pike towards Highway 58, you'll hit this property on your right as you're pulling up to Lakeside.
It's like that action graphic thing sits right there on the street, but that land sits right there, kind of like behind to the side of action graphic.
So
Including those buildings at Action Graphic?
the action graphic is that.
Is that little building right there, you see it?
So you've got Jersey Pike, sorry, I should have done a better job.
Is that north south on the map?
Yeah. Yes, it's south.
So Action Graphic is the building right above the blue block. You see the, like, right above the blue block. It's like, if you coming from Long John Silver, well, you know it ain't that no more, KFC, and you pass, Lakeside, it's that.
So if you look at the school building, that's Lakeside. The church that is on the same property is Olivet.
Church says that's the
It's right there
church.
on the left.
So it's like Lakeside, Olivet, the driveway, the property, Action Graphic. That is right. I live right down the street, so it's really like, I mean, y'all laughing, but that's pretty much like it. And you drive through, and it connects.
So we haven't got that far, obviously, but,
What do we use it for? I think that's,
so-
what's our plan to use it for?
so future consideration, when you think about that property, right now, the existing property is about 25 acres, and this would add about 14. We currently, will have a soccer field on that property and some tennis courts. We're working with the city, access to those, softball and baseball fields behind the property. But when you think about future uses possibly for expanding athletic fields, for parking spaces for those athletic fields, if there was ever a need for an expansion, you've got the property access there. In terms of assessment, we obviously haven't done an assessment, but we did look at kind of comparable properties, and there was a property sold that's just down Highway 58 that was a similar size in Tucker. I can't remember the price that it sold for. It was like 800,
It was like 890, I think.
890. So I think that the offer obviously would be under the, I mean, you would start with an offer well under the 1.2.
You need any help negotiating, I'm glad.
Chairman Wingate.
How is this currently zoned?
So it's R1 zoning, which is residential 1, and if you look under guidelines for residential 1, you know, you can put a school building there, you can put park spaces there, you can put, you know, basically anything that we would be utilizing fits under that R1.
All right, so, okay.
And of course, we would, if we did want to move forward with this, we'd put a due diligence period where we would engage with Mr. Bennett to ensure that my research is correct.
So in keeping with our conversation this evening about building a core within a space to allow for expansion of a building, we're repurposing the Lakeside Academy building. But as far as I can tell, based on our other conversation, the capacity, the total number of students that could potentially be in the building with the funding that we have is possibly not the ideal, most efficient number of students. Now, we haven't decided as a board what that number is, but the other conversations we've had in the last year lead me to believe that if we could get 300 more kids in that building, that we would be setting ourselves up for greater efficiency over the long term. So, that being my hypothesis, I'm frankly less interested in expanding athletic fields that this magnet school has already identified they don't necessarily need, and more interested in capacity for students in a K-12 environment, so that our staffing and our resourcing of that school can be most efficient over the long term. Tell me how this rectangle would help us do that, and tell me where the money's gonna come from were we to negotiate this.
Yeah. So start with A, the way this could help with that issue that you just raised is you do have enough space there, especially with the shared resources of the current building that is in the process of being designed, that down the road, if we wanted to add space for 300 or 400 or 500 more students, you could put a lower school there. You could add a pre-K through 3 or a K through 3 building on that 14.5 acres. Again, it's separated by is essentially a soccer field, and you obviously put some spaces there that would be shared. But in that example that you're giving, Ms. Hill, I think that would be a good use of that property. Second question that you asked in terms of money is a question I think that the board has to talk about and discuss if this is what we want to do, if we want to move forward with it. Okay, if we offer 950, where does that 950 come from?
I'll say, if I could use an example, to avoid a Title IX lawsuit, we purchased 5 acres at Little High School, 5, 6 years ago? Is that right? And why the board voted 9-0 to spend that, we did negotiate from $1,600,000 down to $900,000 on a high quality, high cost property there. But the rationale that the board had at that time, and I think it's very fitting here also, is just what you said, Dr. Robertson, is yes, it's athletic fields, but it also allows for academic expansion. You can have, and I think that's what we'd be looking at here. Anytime that we can get quality land adjoining a property, I think if we get a reasonable price, and if we have the money, I certainly think we should explore it. The combination of not just athletic fields, I agree with you, ma'am, I agree with you. But when we look at possible, the potential for academic expansion with the growth of the county, I think that's very possible. But we see where the money comes from.
Ms. Jones?
I was gonna, say, and I had this similar question, I think Justin and I talked about this, but I was gonna say that, also, I don't know if have you been to Lakeside, Jenny? So like, in front of Lakeside is like this huge parking lot. So you have the church, which the church really uses Lakeside's parking lot, to the church, and you have the parking lot, and then you have Lakeside. So even if we use that land for parking and then build out into the front of the school, I mean, because the way Lakeside is made, you have like the entrance, and then there's the gym auditorium thing. And the way it's made, you actually could probably reconfigure from the front as well to actually provide a safer entrance, because at Lakeside you have to walk in and then walk around into the office. So you probably could reconfigure to the front of the building and use the parking lot and maybe shift the lot. But then of course you could use the lot for an additional building that would kind of separate too. So I think that was what I was saying, like maybe to expand to the front and then use that for parking, or either vice versa, because that front expands the length of not the length, that is the width of the school.
Yeah, correct.
The width of the school,
Correct.
which is pretty long. So you probably could work it that way. I mean, I could see that happening for classroom size. And then you could go up, because the way that is built right there, you could just take it out. If you needed to go up, you could take it up. You could do whatever in that aspect.
This definitely illustrates the need for these operating principles to be decided on, so that we know what we're doing. Like even thinking about having 2 buildings as a solution, I think about what we have happening in District 6 with Normal Park, where we've got a principal who has to deal with 2 buildings. And so anyway, just start as we mean to go on with how we do this.
Yeah, and I think, I agree. I think some of the challenge is, I'll be honest, we're working within the means of what we got, right? So if we had, $50, $60 million, you'd build a brand new, what you want, how you want it, and so we feel good about what we'll be able to do. One thing I would share is that, and Tucker will probably give you more context on this, but this is probably a piece of property that, it's not it's a property that has been one that kind of had an eye out from afar. I think there was some conversation and dealings with it, with another offer, and it maybe didn't work out, and so it's back up and available. But honestly, if it had been available when we brought the initial plans forward for CSLA, we would have brought it as well. It just so happened that particular deal fell through. So I think it's there. I think also from a strategic standpoint, it's good not to be short-sighted. We've got, for instance, Sale Creek. It's been about 2 years ago or 3 years ago, but we purchased the acreage around Sale Creek for you know, potential future expansion or whatever happens as the northern end of the county, you know, continues to grow, you don't wanna be buying that property while it's at its highest dollar. And so anyhow, you know, that's kind of the challenge that's right here. We've got the funds that we've got, to go about a project in a very different way than, you know, we traditionally have. Kind of fortunately, this piece of property adjoining it has become available, and it's just something that the board, you know, has to consider and give us direction on as far as that's concerned.
Dr. Allender?
Can I say, I would hope that we would authorize you guys to negotiate, subtly and discreetly without announcing everything to the public. We don't want someone to come in and outbid us.
Too late.
That's all. I would hope that.
Too late.
We figured it out.
Too late.
It's right there.
Just public, please be nice to the county. Because I'm like, too late. Somebody about to go over there
I
now.
will give a little bit of context of this. When we started looking at Lakeside, looking from an aerial, and I saw this property, I think the next day, Justin, when I said, hey, Lakeside, is that viable? The next day I got a Zillow notification that said pending, and I was like, well, is that not just our luck with CSLA? And then that offer fell through, and so I think, as we did with like Sell Creek, it's not every day that a piece of property that goes up against one of our schools comes up for sale, and so I think, we don't wanna get in a position with CSLA where we're landlocked, and this would give us, you know, down the road if we need to do something, in that area, if it's CSLA or whatever, down the road, 8-10 years, we have that property, at our fingertips, and that area is growing so rapidly, and I think once CSLA opens, it's going to be, in high demand, so I think, you know, moving forward and negotiating, I do think the price is high based on what has sold around there. I mean, it's residential property, you know, that the per acre cost is pretty high, but I think that can be negotiated and whatnot. But I think the CSLA community would welcome it, and I think the big thing I think is what Caritza hit on. I think you can do some very creative ways about parking and entrance to the school. You can kind of get that entrance farther off of Highway 58 and bring it closer down to that roundabout, and just kind of make that a safer driveway around the school and whatnot, which I think could be lead to more efficiency at the school level in how they operate daily too.
Land's not getting any cheaper. Worst case scenario, we could resell it next profit 5-10 years from now. Worst case.
I agree.
What are we able to do here for you with regards to that as far as?
Scott, can we verbally
I
just
think-
kind of, based on this conversation?
Yeah.
We're not voting.
Well, I mean, you
You
can't.
can't vote.
Yeah, I know we can't.
Yeah,
I
it's
know we
not,
can't vote.
it's,
Basically, the administration can read the range.
yeah, and we, anything,
I think we are.
anything officially would have to come, I mean, it's gotta come before the board, you know, and
Yeah,
so
that's what I'm saying.
we just wanna be in the light of day, getting rocking and rolling, and, you know, at the end of the day, we don't wanna proceed, you know what I mean? That's completely at the pleasure of the will of the board, but we'll get really deep into due diligence around this piece of property.
And any offer that, or any proposal that the administration might make would be explicitly subject to board approval.
Yep.
You know, and if you haven't been able to do a fund balance, it would also be subject to, county commission approval as well.
Turn it back over to you, Mr. McClendon.
Yeah, I think we see this at the end of all of our presentations, but we want to be the best school district in Tennessee, and I think the bedrock of that is our facilities. And I think we're on the right path of getting a concrete plan in action, and I think it starts with these operating principles, and they'll go a long way in shaping how the administration and we as a board move forward. So I appreciate it. Just, if you will, email those, what do we call them? The common
glossaries.
definitions, the, you know, class size, whatever you can think of, to me and Justin, and we will get another facilities meeting plan Can't remember what we said on the timeline. We'll have to go back and look, but we'll be in communication, get one scheduled. But with that, I'll.
I want to make a quick announcement. So, our next equity discussion will be on the 16th. Board meeting is on the 19th. So, email this out. The 16th is typically our agenda discussion. So, if you all are not opposed to this, and I'm open to whatever you all want to do, but if you're not opposed to this, what I thought we may do is instead of having 2 meetings, an agenda discussion, which will go however long it goes, and then having an equity discussion for the sake of time and efficiency, the staff will be available on the 16th at the very beginning for any questions you may have about the agenda. So we won't go line item by line item as we normally do. And please, if you don't have any objection to this, bring your question, and we'll address those at the very beginning, and then we can move into our discussion, and hopefully that'll save some time. You all okay with that? It'll be at 5:30. Yes, ma'am, normal time.
So
Okay.
what time? Monday
5:30.
at 5:30?
With that, I'll adjourn.
Can I make a quick announcement?
Sure.
The fundraising has put out coupon books. Encourage, look through this is your gift from them. They go for $10. The schools that sell them get $7 of that money, and as tight as money is, and they can't go door to door. They don't want to go door to door. It's doing online sales. Any encouragement you can give the schools to raise money, that will help them to fundraiser. It's a lot better fundraiser than chocolate sales and healthier too. But thank you. Appreciate that. Dr. Johnson, how are we looking on the COVID? I've been getting calls about